Commissioner Parsons, first of all, thanks very much for joining us. I think you mentioned that Lancaster County will receive about $106 million as a result of the bill passed in March by our Democratic colleagues. And that 106 is on top of roughly 95 million Lancaster County got from the CARES Act. So that's $201 million in just a little over a year. Approximately, if you happen to know off the top of your head, about what percentage of the county budget is that?
Thank you, Senator Toomey. Our total budget with state money is about $334 million. Our general fund budget, which is mostly county money, is about $215 million. So you're talking about basically the whole value of our general fund, budget. Our yearly total budget, it's about 2/3 of it.
About 2/3. Now, Lancaster County, as I understand it, was a county in which revenue was a little bit below last year. Do you know about how much lost revenue you had that could be reasonably attributed to COVID and the lockdown?
We're estimating right now it's somewhere around $9 million for 2020.
Around 9 million. So the federal government, between the CARES Act and this most recent bill, sent what, 25 times the lost revenue approximately. So let me ask you about another question. If it were the case that states and municipalities simply couldn't borrow funds when needed, then I understand how people would suggest, well, that's something the federal government can do, so we ought to do this. But my understanding is across the credit rating spectrum, large and small municipalities alike, borrowing costs for states and municipalities are actually significantly below their pre-COVID levels, and municipal debt issuance has been very strong. So far in 2021, state and local governments have issued nearly $190 billion in bonds. The same period in 2019, an ordinary year pre-COVID, was only $152 billion. So the combination of low interest rates and high volume certainly doesn't suggest that municipalities can't borrow. Now, I understand Lancaster County's awash with cash from the federal government, so you don't need to issue debt. But if you did, do you think the county would have a difficult time issuing bonds or otherwise borrowing funds that were needed?
I talked to a lot of my colleagues around the state, and I'm not aware of any difficulty in borrowing for capital projects. In Lancaster County, we're trying to pay down our debt. We've paid down around $100 million of debt, and we'd like to continue that. But we do, from time to time, still need to borrow new money or sometimes refinance debt. We did that, I think, twice last year, once in March, right around the beginning of the pandemic, and then once in August. And we didn't have any difficulty borrowing, and I'm not aware of any significant difficulty.
Thank you. Mr. Riedel, you made a point that U.S. infrastructure tends to be more costly than our international peers, which is kind of maddening for taxpayers to think that they have to pay more than the going rate, so to speak. An example that is pretty amazing, New York's East Side Access Project, which will connect the Long Island Railroad with New York's Grand Central Station, is estimated to cost $3.5 billion per mile, which is more than 7 times the international average for this type of project. 7 times. Can you help us understand why American infrastructure is so expensive and inefficient?
Thank you, Senator. There's multiple reasons. If you're looking at the New York system, they have even that's actually not atypical. 4 times the global average is the subway cost in New York City. A lot of it, the reason for American infrastructure is expensive, as I mentioned, the environmental reviews can take 7, sometimes 17 years to finish. And then you have to build defensively, because basically anybody can challenge the environmental reviews and the historical artifacts reviews. There's so many lawsuits that can delay you for years. So you end up with defensive construction that's more meant to avoid lawsuits than to necessarily build efficiency. You also have things like the Davis-Bacon Act, which I know a lot of senators will cost. You also simply have contracting problems, where often governments contract with the lowest bid, even with contractors who have a reputation for going way over the cost. There's a lot of places to reform infrastructure.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.